Today we're looking at The Road to Oz, part of the Complete Stories of Oz collection by L. Frank Baum. So just some background on this real quick. This collection, this is my second time attempting to get through it. The last time I tried was 5 years ago, in which I got through the first 5 stories and halfway into story number 6. I'm also doing this as a buddy reads with Dane Reads. At the moment I'm recording this video, he has not uploaded his review yet, so I've not seen it, but as soon as he does, I'll put a link in the description down below. I have seen his written review, which he posted on his website, and I'll link to that down below. And then I'm also bringing in supplemental knowledge from Tor.com. They had a reviewer, Marie Ness, who did a read through of the Oz series about 10 years ago and reviewed all the books. And I find her reviews very intelligent. I'll link to her stuff down below. I'll link to her review of this book down below. And then Wikipedia. I've done a little bit of jumping around on Wikipedia for background on some of these characters and stuff like that. So that's my background. I'll be bringing all of that into the review. So, The Road to Oz. This is book number 5 in the Oz series, published, I believe, in 1909. And this book, when I attempted this collection 5 years ago, it was round about this time that my interest in this collection started to wane. I made it a little bit into the subsequent book, the Emerald City to Oz, book number 6. But it was evident here that my interest was starting to waver. Now, I never intentionally abandoned this book. I never intentionally abandon any books, really. Almost never. But what happened is I was reading several books at the time, like I usually do, and as my interest started to wane a little bit, I started to read less and less of this book, and then before you know it, it had been a couple months and I had never picked it up again, and then 5 years goes by, and now I'm attempting to get through this collection again. I was reminded of that as I was rereading it now, because I felt like it was a little bit of a slog. Like the story didn't really grab me. And because I'm doing this as a buddy read with Dane Reads, I was feeling reluctant to trash the story too much. Because, he's doing this as a buddy reads with me, partly at my suggestion or invitation. He said he was going to read through the Oz books. He had intended to read through the Oz books at some point, but the reason he's doing it sooner rather than later is because I invited him along on this journey with me. So I didn't want to be like, well, this book was absolutely terrible. This was a low point because I've already encouraged him to come along on this journey with me. But fortunately, I got to see his written review first, and he has similar thoughts to me. The magic seems to be waning at this point. Now, he said it wasn't terrible, and I'd agree with it. It wasn't terrible. There are certain charming aspects to the story, but it's becoming formulaic at this point, is what he said, and I'd agree with that completely. It's becoming formulaic. So at this point in the series, 5 books in, there is a formula. For one thing, it's almost always, not almost always, it's always been a journey story. So the characters start out at point A, they go to point B, and they encounter strange things and dangers along the way, but there's not really a plot. It's just go along the road and meet things. Possible exception is the second book, the Marvelous Land of Oz, because there was a plot about a revolt in the Land of Oz in that book. But it was still, the bulk of the book was still going along the road and encountering stuff. So they're all journey stories. The first two books, it was a journey story within the land of Oz. Then, starting with book 3, there's a shift. Uh, from book 3, the journey is to get to Oz. So in the first two books, Oz was the dangerous place. Now it's established that Oz is a safe and happy place where there's no danger. Bit of a continuity retcon in places, but we'll talk about that later. So now the dangerous places are all the different fairy lands outside of Oz. And once you're in there, then you're journeying to Oz to get to safety. So that's been the plot of book 3, book 4, and now book 5. Another part of the formula is that each book introduces new characters to go along on this journey with the main character, who is usually Dorothy. It was Tip in book 2, but aside from Tip, I think it's been Dorothy in every other story. And I'm not quite sure why this is part of the formula. Why we need to introduce new characters in every book. It reminds me a little bit of the He-Man cartoons I grew up watching when I was young. So if you're familiar, a lot of the cartoons in the 80s, He-Man most notably, but a lot of them, took place after Reagan deregulated television. Before the deregulations, television kids cartoon shows could not be one long advertisement for a toy line. After Reagan deregulated it, they could actually be one long advertisement for a toy line, and all of a sudden all the cartoons in the 80s were just advertisements for toys. He-Man most egregiously, because as more and more action figures started flooding the market, the cartoon just had to show new characters in practically every episode to introduce new characters that you had to go out and buy the toys of, to the point where it got, there were so many characters they were juggling, it was ridiculous. And yet, I don't hate that He-Man cartoon show. Part of this is nostalgia talking. But as a kid, I was fascinated by this ever-expanding universe of He-Man and his friends and enemies, and how there were just more and more characters being put into this ongoing story. And to a certain extent, as an adult, I still find that interesting. L. Frank Baum is doing the same thing. He's not. There wasn't, as far as I'm aware, there wasn't a line of Oz action figures. So I'm not quite sure why he's doing this, but he's definitely doing this. Every story, we get like 4 or 5 new strange creatures. And then at the end of that story, there's an extended roundup scene where all the old characters show up and make brief cameos. Like, "Hi, Dorothy, remember me? I was your friend in book 3." And she'll be like, "Oh, TikTok. Oh, how I've missed you." And so like the last third of the book is like all the old characters coming up for cameos. So it's almost like he's trying to keep a toy line going, huh? He's not, but he's introducing new characters, but at the end, he wants to make sure you remember all the old characters. There is a part of me, again, that finds this sort of world building fascinating, where the cast of characters in Oz is getting bigger and bigger, and L. Frank Baum is at pains to make sure that you don't forget about the old characters, even as he's introducing new characters. It does, however, slow down the plot of the book, because the last 2 books, once they've got into Oz, have just become one character after another showing up for their introduction or their reintroduction. So that does kill the forward momentum of the plot. Even though I do appreciate that he's L. Frank Baum is making a conscious effort to bring back all the characters back for each successive book. Um, yeah. So this book introduces some new characters. There's Dorothy and Toto. This is incidentally the first book that Toto has been back into Oz with since the first book. Um, the last couple times Dorothy was in Oz, she went without Toto, and she meets a hobo or a tramp. Again, this book was published, I think, in 1909, so I guess those kind of stereotypical hobo characters were very much in literature at the time. Um, who is referred to as the Shaggy Man, or I think Dorothy just calls him Shaggy Man, without the. Uh, the inside the text, the narration refers to him as the Shaggy Man. He wants to find the way to Butterfield, so Dorothy goes out to show them, and then all of a sudden, they find themselves where they're at a crossroads, but all of a sudden there are all these roads that are just appear out of nowhere, and they don't know which way to go. And they meet another character who's this boy called Button Bright, who his gimmick is that he's called Button Bright because his dad says he's as bright as a button, and yet he appears to be very stupid. He just refers to everything. He questions everything with just a simple why, or if he's told something very simple, like Dorothy says to him, where are you from? And he says, oh, I don't know. And Dorothy says, well, you must know where you're from. And he says, must I? And it's a little bit unclear if he's completely stupid, or if he's just doing the Socratic method of questioning everything. Um, they bring him along on their travels, and then they meet other characters like the foxes, who think that Button Bright is so wise because he always asks all these intelligent questions. So that's his gimmick. They also run into Polychrome, who's the Rainbow's daughter. So she lives up on the rainbow, and her father, I guess, is the rainbow, kind of a Greek pantheon idea of the rainbow where everything's personified, I guess. And she accidentally falls off the rainbow, and now she's lost. So they run into her. Incidentally, I discovered this while looking around on Wikipedia, because Dane said in one of his reviews, I think it was the review of the second book, at one point some of the characters says, we're friends of Dorothy. And Dane said, friends of Dorothy? Isn't that a slang way of saying gay people? And I looked it up on Wikipedia, and indeed it is a slang way of saying gay people, or a coded way of saying gay people. And nobody really seems to know where it comes from, that phrase. People are fairly sure it has some sort of connection to the Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, but not sure if it's from the movies or from the books or whatever. But one theory is that it comes from The Road to Oz, because Dorothy is always introducing her friends as saying, I'd like to introduce you to my queer friends. Queer meaning strange, I guess, but also used in culture to refer to homosexuals. I'm not sure at what point queer meaning homosexual entered the lexicon, because that would be one of those things you would need to track down to see if this was indeed the origin of it. But yeah, apparently there's a theory that the road to Oz is why Friends of Dorothy is a coded way of referring to gay people. Anyways, you can use that little bit of pop culture trivia at your next cocktail party. But moving on, so these are the new companions: Shaggy Man, Button Bright, and Polychrome, the Rainbow's daughter. And once they figure out that they're in some sort of fairyland, And then they just go around from point A to point B and encounter obstacles along the way. Um, and it's established at the first place that they go to that Ozma of Oz is going to be having a birthday party, and everyone wants to be invited. So this is now the central conflict of the part of the book: is can they get to Oz in time for Ozma's birthday party that everyone so desperately wants an invitation to? So the stakes are pretty low right off the bat. Um, and they go to a town that's full of anthropomorphic foxes, uh, and there's no real danger, but they just encounter this strange fox culture. And then the foxes warn them. They said that if you keep going down this road, it's going to be populated by some very stupid animals. And then they see a sign that says half a mile to Donkey Town, but everything's misspelled. Let me see if I can find that. I'm not sure if this is going to show up or not, but half a mile to Donkey Town, meaning Donkey Town. And so the donkeys aren't quite as stupid maybe as the foxes make them out to be, but they're not the brightest animals, and they're overly fond of big words and ornate ways of speaking, which disguise how stupid they actually are, which is perhaps a satire on educated people or people who use big words as an affect. I don't know. They encounter a musicer, a creature who every time he breathes he lets out music, so he has a habit of annoying everyone else around him. And then they do run into the Scoodlers, and the Scoodlers are I think the brief time in this book that there's some serious danger that's introduced. Scoodlers are these creatures that have two sides, so they have like a face on this side and a face on this side, and they've got legs like in a T shape, so they can go either way, legs facing this way and legs facing that way. And they can take off their heads and throw it at people. And it turns out that they eat travelers, so they want to put Dorothy and her friends in soup, so they get captured by the Scoodlers and then have to escape from the Scoodlers. But aside from the Scoodlers, there's not really any danger in this journey. The big stakes again is, will they make it in time for Ozma's birthday party? And I don't know, it's not quite as inventive as the other Oz stories. When I was reviewing book 4, Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz, I was saying, oh, that it's so strange and bizarre and trippy and wonderful. The same can't be said of this book. It's I don't know. It's okay. It's okay. The Fox Town is interesting enough. The Donkey Town is interesting enough. The musicer is okay, but it's okay. Yeah, the other thing, as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, okay, so it's been established in the previous 2 books with some inconsistencies that now Ozma has a magic belt with which she can bring Dorothy back to Oz at any time, and that Ozma is regularly checking in on Dorothy through this magic picture that they have to see if Dorothy needs to come back to Oz. So all this time that Dorothy is making this long journey into Oz, I'm thinking, okay, well, what about the magic belt? And then we get to the end, finally, and we do find out what's going on. Ozma said, yes, of course, I was watching you the whole time, and I would have used the magic belt if you were in any real danger, but I decided not to use it because you weren't in danger. She said I was almost going to use it when you were in danger with the Scoodlers, but then you guys escaped that by yourself. So Okay, fine. I guess that solves the continuity issue from Ozma's end, but still from Dorothy's end, right? Dorothy herself seems to have forgotten about that magic belt during all these travelers. Sorry, during all her travels. She doesn't seem to. It doesn't seem to click at any point where says to herself, "Oh, I forgot. Ozma's got the magic belt. I just need to wave to her, and she'll bring us into Oz." Which was also one of my criticisms of the previous book, where Dorothy forgot until the last minute that all this time, all she had to do was signal to Ozma to get back into the land of Oz with the magic belt. Yeah, that magic belt seems to be creating as many narrative problems as it solves. But, anyways, they do eventually make it back into Oz. And then they meet up all their old friends. And, yeah, again, like I said before, I do appreciate the fact that all these old characters, L. Frank Baum is making an effort to keep the characters in the narrative, even though he's got more characters and he knows what to do with at this point. I'm not quite sure why he keeps bringing in new characters with every book. My best guess is perhaps bringing in new characters disguises a little bit that you're recycling plots. I'm not sure. But then they get to Ozma's birthday party, where not only do all the old Oz characters come up to make cameos, but cameos come in from characters who were from several of L. Frank Baum's other books. So L. Frank Baum, although he's remembered today for the Oz series, wrote a number of children's books back in his day, and he was trying very hard to get another book or another series to pick up the way the Oz books did, and he never got success with another series, but he was trying. So he's at Ozma's party. He introduces characters from 4 of his other books. And I didn't write this down, so I'm not sure I can remember these offhand. There's some sort of Santa book. There's one some sort of Candyland book, which is called like John Cherub and King Doe or something like that. There's something about Mary and Dot, I believe, and then there's something about a Queen Ixie or something like that. It's all on Wikipedia. It's all on Wikipedia if you want to track this down. So they're at Ozma's party, and then like all the characters from the Santa Claus book will come in, and it'll describe them all. And then all the characters from the Queen Ixie book will come in, and it'll describe them all, and Dorothy will say hi to them. And then all the characters from the Candyland book will come in. And yeah, so I guess what L. Frank Baum was trying to do is to try and with these tie-ins, draw attention to his other books with the hope that maybe some of these would pick up and become successful series. I think these 4 books I just mentioned, none of them ever became a series. Like there's only one book about King John Cherub and King Doe in the Candyland. Never got to 2 books, but perhaps if sales had picked up, they would have become a series. I don't know. So there's a ulterior motive to doing this. He's trying to pick up sales of his other book, or at least Wikipedia says it's speculated that that's why this crossover is happening. It's speculated that he's trying to pick up the sales of his other books. And plot-wise, it's not going anywhere at all. And yet, there's definitely a part of me that's completely fascinated by this idea of an Oz extended universe. Um, and yeah, this is something I mentioned in one of my previous reviews. When I picked this book up from the bookstore, it says The Complete Stories of Oz. And I thought, okay, this is complete. But it turns out this is not complete at all. I mentioned this with my review of the second book, The Marvelous Land of Oz. Again, if you go to Wikipedia, turns out that the characters from the Marvelous Land of Oz were appearing in a weekly comic strip in the newspapers, and then the Wogglebug got his own spin-off book, which was a spin-off of the comic book, a comic strip, and those stories are not included in here. Only the 14 and a half canonical stories of L. Frank Baum are in this collection. As well as the crossovers that happened with L. Frank Baum's other books. Those books are not in here. I'd be curious to read them, and they're all on Project Gutenberg. I've been checking. But I'm not going to read them on Project Gutenberg. I spend so much time on the computer as it is. If I can't get my hand on a print copy, I'm not going to bother with it. But there's a certain part of me which would like to do like there's a certain part of me that says, okay, I want to do this complete. If I'm going to read the complete stories of Oz, I want the complete stories of Oz, and I want to track down these other books. As well, Button Bright and Polychrome are going to be. They're going to be. This is looking ahead chronologically, but L. Frank Baum is going to try and pick up another series that he's going to try and get going after the Emerald City of Oz about sea fairies and Captain Bill. And Button Bright and Polychrome from the Oz books, from the Road to Oz, are going to be imported into that series. And then when that series doesn't take off, he's going to bring those characters back into the Oz stories again. This is just information I'm getting from Wikipedia looking ahead. So that other spin-off series that's coming up about the sea fairies, again, that's not in here. It's on Wikipedia. Yeah, I don't know. As a kid, I was always fascinated by these big, expanded universes of fantasy with the He-Man characters, or comic book continuity and all the crossovers and connections with those. For whatever reason, people like me who are geeks get fascinated by this stuff. So there's definitely a certain part of my personality which is fascinated by these crossovers in this extended universe. Again, according to Wikipedia, eventually a map is going to emerge, which is going to put Oz in the center. And then there's the Deadly Desert, which is around the Oz. And the Deadly Desert has already popped up in a few of these books now. But then after the Deadly Desert, there are all these other fairylands, which L. Frank Baum is going to put all around Oz. And some of these pop up in the Oz books, and some of these pop up in L. Frank Baum's other books, but then get tied into the Oz extended universe. But that map, according to Wikipedia, I don't think is going to be created until TikTok of Oz, which is going to be what book? 6, 7, 8, 9. The ninth book. Now this edition here doesn't have any pictures, because they sacrificed pictures to just cram all the stories into one volume. But I guess if you did have a proper edition with the original illustrations in it, I think that's where that map apparently first pops up. It's all on Wikipedia now, but I think TikTok of Oz is when it was first created. Yeah, actually, speaking of everything being on Wikipedia, um, the the book gives you absolutely no help with identifying which characters are crossover characters from L. Frank Baum's other books. It's not like it's not like they're identified or anything like that. And this edition, of course, is very bare bones. It's just the text. Although I suspect this would be true of most editions of The Road to Oz, unless I don't know. Is there like some sort of fully annotated? I know there is an annotated The Wonderful Wizard of Oz that's out there. I don't think there's a fully annotated The Road to Oz out there, but or is there? I don't know. Let me know. Um, so the way you have to track down these characters is of course by referencing Wikipedia. So when they talk about King Doe, then you just type into Google, okay, King Doe, and then the Wikipedia page will pop up for him. And it was by going back and forth with Google and Wikipedia that I was able to track these characters down to the four different books that I mentioned, which does involve a fair amount of legwork over on Google and Wikipedia for a silly children's book like this. It feels like I'm spending more time looking up references in the Oz books than I am when I read something like Herodotus. But with something like Herodotus, you expect to be sent to Wikipedia every now and again. With these Oz books, you don't maybe expect that level of commitment to intertextuality that you have to sort through. But there you go. You have to go to Wikipedia to find out all the crossovers. Of course, Wikipedia is pretty recent now, isn't it? So what did people do before the internet? I guess for the most part, maybe they just didn't catch those references. Well, there you go, huh? So, anyways, yes, The Road to Oz. Crossovers from all of L. Frank Baum's other books. And, I almost forgot about this. The other interesting thing that begins in this book is L. Frank, the Tin Woodman in this book gives a rundown of Oz's economics, where he says, there's no money here in the land of Oz. We wouldn't dream of using money because if somebody gave you money to do work, then that would mean that you were doing that work only for the money and not because you wanted to. Or if someone gave you money for food, it meant you were just you were selling him the food because you were greedy and not because you genuinely cared about him and wanted to give him food. So that there's no grubby money here in Oz. Now this, of course, like so many other things in this series, is a retcon, retroactive continuity. There were definitely allusions to money in the earlier books. They weren't big plot points as far as I remember. Well, except in the Marvelous Land of Oz, there's a big plot point where the Scarecrow got stuffed with money after he lost some of his straw. Other than that, I think money was mostly mentioned incidentally, but it was definitely in there. There were references to buying and selling of stuff. Marie Ness over at Tor.com pinpoints this as kind of the turning point where Oz is becoming this utopian communist society. And apparently, this is going to be a running theme that's going to be expanded on more during the rest of L. Frank Baum's Oz books. And then Marie Ness at Tor.com indicates that this is something that's going to be picked up on even more by his successors. Because after L. Frank Baum died, the publishers handed the series off to other writers. She calls this a communist utopian society, and if you go and read the comments, and the comments are generally pretty interesting over on her reviews, There's some debate about whether this is communism or whether this is just a different form of utopianism. But there's something going on. And then the other shift that comes at some point is, I think it's established at some point that there's no death in the land of Oz, which again is something that was not true in the first book. So this is another retroactive continuity. It's the Tin Woodman talks about it. He said something like that. There's no death in the land of Oz unless you are found deserving of being killed at a trial. You can still get the death penalty apparently. Which was definitely a plot point in the previous book when Eureka the kitten was put on trial for her life. Now, yeah, it's not really fleshed out here, and I'm not sure if it's going to get fleshed out in subsequent books about how or why everyone is immortal, or how or why there's no death in the land of Oz. But I'm led to believe, just by what I've been reading, that this will become a bigger issue in the books going forward. So there are a number of interesting things going on around the edges. The tie-ins with the L. Frank Baum's other books in the Extended Oz universe. Most of these other books, as far as I can figure out from Wikipedia, will not majorly impact the Oz stories, although there will be a cameo made from time to time, except for the Sea Fairies. But that one that hadn't been written yet at this point. But the shift towards Oz being some sort of utopia where nobody needs money and nobody dies, that I think is going to be a big shift coming up, or going forward. That starts here. So, yeah, I think I'll wrap this review up here. Sorry, as always, for rambling on so long. The next book, The Emerald City of Oz, as far as memory serves, I think that's where I gave up halfway through on. I don't exactly remember where the exact page I left off on, but I think this is a book I remember starting but not finishing. And then once we get through the Emerald City of Oz, yeah, The Patchwork Girl of Oz is book number 7. I think I definitely didn't read that. So I'm going to be into pretty virgin reviewing territory. For me. It's been reviewed before, I'm sure, by other people on BookTube. But it'll be my first time going through the rest of these stories after I get through the next one. So stick around, and I'll continue going through these Oz books and rambling about them, and hopefully continuing to coordinate with Dane Reeds if this book didn't put him off completely.